My initial response to the PSA banner brief was that it looked like a really exciting challenge, and it looked like it would combine a lot of the things, both conceptually and practically, that interest me. I have an interest in New Zealand's national identity and culture, so how we choose to portray and package ourselves not only to foreigners but also to ourselves. And this is very much reflected in most of the work that I do, or most of the work that is self-generated, and I have several ranges of textile products and jewellery as well, and those themes come through in that work. In the historical banners that I looked at, what I found particularly interesting as a pattern designer was a lot of the ornate detail and the sense of sort of trusted tradition that came through with the use of crest-like shapes and motifs, and I was really interested in using that to reference the past and create that sort of sense of trust and history. I wanted to do something that was bold and graphic and involved silhouettes, and I love working with leather because it has so many connotations with sort of being utilitarian and hard wearing and durable, but at the same time there is sort of a slightly luxurious element to it. And in terms of the backing cloth, I've chosen an outdoor awning fabric for its durability. As I considered what imagery I would use, there were a couple things that I really wanted to include, and one of them was that I did want to contextualise it within New Zealand. So I introduced New Zealand flora and fauna, so you see the tui and the kiraroo, as well as pahutakawa leaves, kowhai and karaka berries, to name a few. And I also wanted to capture a sense of traditional occupations as well as more contemporary ones that the PSA represents. Justice, transport, lands and survey, science and research and industrial development. There was a specific request to include a typewriter to acknowledge the history of, support staff. I also put in some familiar everyday things that have become part of most people's lives, like a USB plug and a Wi-Fi sign, and things that sort of are very contemporary and represent the now. I work largely digitally, so I was working in Photoshop and Illustrator, and largely in Photoshop just to be able to manipulate things easily and draw in and place elements, and then because I was getting it laser cut, inevitably it needs to end up as a vector file so that it's all smooth paths that can then be traced by the laser. With the laser cutting of the leather, before they laser cut it, they apply application tape, which is just like giant masking tape, and that's got a couple of purposes. From their end, the purpose is that it stops the burn marks from spreading onto the surface of the leather, which obviously I'm wanting to keep it nice and white and not burnt, and from my point of view it makes it a lot easier when it comes to colouring the edges, because it masks out any of the white leather paint that might fall onto the surface, and making that process a lot easier. When I get the laser cut leather back, the sheets, I then need to remove the negative space, paint the edges of the leather, and then I need to carefully peel them off so as not to distort or stretch the leather too much. After the laser cut leather motifs have been prepared, they then need to be located in the right position on the backing cloth. And to do this, I have projected the design onto the piece of canvas that is pinned up on the wall and traced around it in dressmaking chalk that can be erased or brushed off afterwards. With the smaller motifs, I'm just locating them temporarily before I stitch with spray adhesive, and with the larger motifs I am going to use a more permanent adhesive to hold the sort of larger areas, to make sure that it permanently holds to the cloth and there's no sort of bagging out. It was quite appealing to me that it was a union project. In a previous lifetime, before I formally trained as a textile designer, I worked in the Education Review Office where I belonged to the PSA, and when I taught at Massey for 8 years I belonged to the TEU, and my experience with unions has only ever been very positive. They've been very helpful and very supportive. I'm thrilled that my design has been chosen, to represent the PSA going forward, and my aims were that it would project a sense of solidarity, pride and identity, and that is certainly how I hope that it will be received.